I'm Chris Osmond, and this is my take. I'd like to go over some of the ways in which the money has been impacted in the United States, as far as how it's created and who controls it, and what some of the people who have benefited from it the most, the ways in which those people have controlled it. Now, as I said the other day, we went off the gold standard in 1971. This was done by Richard Nixon. And basically, what the gold standard did was it backed every US dollar with the amount of gold that America had in its coffer or in its vault. And once we went off the gold standard, our money became what is known as a fiat currency, which means by decree, which means that whoever creates the money basically gets to say what the value of that money is. And that depends on a centralized set of or group of people saying what the value of the money is. The rest of us have little say in that. So we went off the gold standard, and one of the ways in which we were able to make the US dollar worth more is by cutting a deal with the oil producers over in the Middle East, places like Saudi Arabia, where we offered to exchange and trade with them their oil, and they basically agreed to only trade and sell their oil in US dollars. So anybody that wanted to do business with Saudi Arabia would have to get American dollars, convert their currency to American dollars, and then go out and buy the oil from Saudi Arabia. Now, in return, what Saudi Arabia got was protection via the U.S. military. We basically said that we will keep you safe from, your enemies in the region, and Saudi Arabia agreed to this. What this did was it made the U.S. dollar that much more important. So much so that other partners in the area and around the globe decided to trade with America, utilizing the U.S. dollar as a means of settlement in those trades. So the U.S. dollar became the currency of reserve for the entire globe. This made America that much more important, so that when America saw its enemies and sometimes its allies going against its desires, the leadership in America could basically sanction those people in those countries going against what they wanted, which meant that they could basically tell those people, they could sanction those people and basically forbid them from trading in US dollars and forbid anybody else from trading with them utilizing the US dollar system, which was what the world was using at the time. Another thing that happened was that we had a law that was called Glass-Steagall, and it basically separated commercial banks from investment banks, meaning that commercial banks were allowed to put out loans for consumers, homeowners, for things like that, things that weren't as risky. Because if you're going to take a loan out for a home that you're living in, it's more likely that you're going to try to keep up with the payments on that loan and not lose that house. And then there were investment banks. Investment banks could go after more risky investments. So when Glass-Steagall was repealed, it basically allowed the investment banks to go after consumer loans. So they started packaging and cutting up all these home loans and basically putting in not so risky loans with very risky loans. And that created a big problem, which all culminated in a Great Recession in 2008, which almost collapsed the global economy. And at the time, our American president, basically George W. Bush, bailed out the banks to the tune of like $700 or $800 billion. And then Obama followed up with another bailout to make the banks whole. Now, I don't think enough people realize happens with bailouts is that they are something that is collected from all of us in our tax dollars. So we all pay for these bailouts to bail out the banks who made these risky bets. But when each of us takes out a loan for this or that or whatever they need to take a loan out for, and we default on our loans, we don't get a bailout. We don't get the whole community helping us basically make us whole when our risky bets fail. So that's one of the problems that we have. And then on top of that, I look at these banks as like loan sharks, but worse than loan sharks, because they basically were boosting up the economy, driving housing prices up by giving everybody loans for housing, no matter whether they had good credit or even a job in some cases, or proof of a job in some cases. These banks were doing everything they could to drive the prices up. And then, all these people go out and get these loans, and all of a sudden the economy collapses. So they're all laid off. So unlike loan sharks, who basically would loan you the money and then give you a couple weeks, and if you didn't pay, they'd break your legs, our own government allowed the banks to do the same thing. But instead of giving you a couple weeks to make your payment, they basically cut the legs out from under the whole economy by almost bankrupting and bringing the global economy to its knees. So that's what happened when Glass-Steagall was repealed. It was repealed on Bill Clinton's last day in office, and he has said that it was one of the things that he regretted most as president, or regretted doing most as president. Like I said, George W. Bush helped bail out the banks, and Obama helped bail out the banks. And Obama had the opportunity to bail out the 5.1 million homes that were facing foreclosure, but he chose not to. Instead, he socialized the debt that the banks were going through and used our tax dollars to bail them out, but refused to bail out the homeowners. This has since become a problem because more and more people have become homeless in America, and that number continues to grow. And housing has gone crazy as more and more of these investors and banks and people with excess cash have basically driven the prices of houses up to the point where people have to wait until they're in their 40s as opposed to in their 20s when they buy their first home, because the price. Another way that people with excessive wealth have used the system to benefit them is if we look at Walmart. Walmart has been caught doing a lot of nefarious things, one of which was to be taking out life insurance policies against some of their sicker employees. As a matter of fact, I think Walmart actually got like a couple $1 million from the passing of one of their employees. This came out in an article, and I think Walmart has since stopped that practice. Another problem with Walmart is that they have basically set it up so that the rest of America has to pay into each Walmart store about $1 million because of the subsidies that its employees have to take out in order to cover the poverty wages that Walmart was paying. They've since improved, but I still think that the Walmart employees are still having to get things like welfare and SNAP and basically other deal with other safety net programs, which are programs that we all pay into with our tax dollars. And this is the Walton family. They're a bunch of billionaires, and basically they, people argue that, oh yeah, they deserve everything they've gotten. They didn't create the Walmart stores, their father did. So they didn't create anything. They're not really adding to the community. They're basically taken away from the community, especially when you look at the number of Walmart stores that have put out local mom and pop shops, put them out of business, only to then close the store down the road as the communities become poor because everybody works for Walmart. So let's move on to the next family, the Purdue family. Purdue family is a family that owned a part of the big pharmacy, and basically they were the family that was behind the opioid epidemic as people in America became more addicted to opioids. And it turned out that this Purdue family not only knew that their drug was addictive, they lied about it and said it wasn't, and they also got caught sending memos around to one another, or to from family members, saying that they also could provide the drugs that would be required to help people break their addiction to the opioids that they were putting out there. And while we're on opioids, let's look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan was providing like 70% of the opioid to the rest of the world. Now, America went in there with its military, and they took over all the poppy fields, which is where opium comes from. They took over all the poppy fields in Afghanistan and supposedly had control over all the poppy fields. This was all at a time when America was going through an opioid epidemic. Now, think about that. Maybe our military should have stopped the flow of opioids or opium to America to stem the tide of the epidemic, but that didn't seem to happen. Now I think the opioids are more synthetic, and they're created in a different manner. And speaking of the military, we do have an instance of a former president decades ago warning about the power that the military industrial complex would have. Now, of course, that is true because look at the budget that our military gets. 1.5 trillion is what they want now, and they still haven't passed an audit since they've been audited. It just seems like that should be something that Elon Musk, his Doge, should have looked at first, not all these other agencies. You get to those eventually, but why not look at one of the biggest expenses that America has, especially since America is in debt to the tune of $40 trillion, and that continues to go up by $1 trillion every year. Now, continuing with the ways in which people with excess wealth have utilized and abused the system, the capitalist system, let's look at vulture capitalists. And we'll look at some of the vulture capitalists that would buy out companies like Toys R Us or Sears, companies that were doing well for themselves until these vulture capitalists bought them out. The vulture capitalists would buy these companies out, then they would load the companies up with debt by taking out all these loans. That debt that they took out was then provided to these vulture capitalists as CEOs or board members. They would get that money back in their exorbitant pay, in bonuses, or in golden parachutes where if they got fired or they quit, they would get this basically a pension to leave the company. Now, since they loaded up Toys R Us in places like Sears, those companies were now on the hook for these debts. And once those debts became due, but Sears no longer had the money to pay them off, those companies would go into bankruptcy. They became insolvent, and those companies went out of business. It wasn't that the companies were doing poorly, it was that the companies were made to be indebted to the point where they could no longer pay off their loans. That is why, this is why I put out my petition, which is called the In the Job Creator Lie petition. It basically kind of points out that not all of the people that we consider job creators are in fact job creators. There are many rich people who simply use their money to make more money. They don't create jobs. They don't innovate. They don't improve technology in any way. They just are able to make bets on risky things. And when they win, they get to keep the profits for themselves. And oftentimes when they lose, that they get their risky bets covered in a socialist manner. So when you hear people complain about socialism and how it doesn't work around the world, question why is it that the banks and the wealthy get basically made whole when their risky bets fail, but the rest of us, we have to suffer and pay off our debts and figure out ways to pay down our debts on our own. The next thing I'd like to point out is that we had we basically went through a worldwide illness recently, and when it came to America, our leaders mandated that everybody stay home. So people weren't working, so the economy slowed down due to this, and what they chose to do was to stimulate the economy by injecting $5 trillion. Now this $5 trillion would cause inflation because when you inject more currency into your economic system, you basically devalue each one of your dollars. And that's what happened. They injected $5 trillion into the economy to stimulate the economy. Now, it did work, things did come back. But look at what they did. If you take all of the 350 million Americans and you calculate how much each one of these was given during that stimulus, you come up with only about 2 trillion going to every single American. And I'm exaggerating that because not every single American got a check. Children didn't get these checks. It was mainly adults, but I'm just going to say 350 million Americans. And then you calculate the checks that they got from both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and you compare that to how much money was actually put into the economy, which was $5 trillion. But $3 trillion of it go to the excessively wealthy. Now, if you really wanted to stimulate your economy, it seems to me that you would give that $5 trillion to the poor and to the middle class, who need to buy as much as they can to pay off their debts, to basically buy all the things that they need to survive. But instead, you give $3 trillion to the wealthy, who don't need that money because they already have all the money they would ever need to pay for the things that they need. So the money, the $3 trillion you give to the wealthy, it goes towards devaluing every dollar in everybody's pocket, but it goes into a vault and most likely won't ever see the light of day again. And then you have the $2 trillion that the poor and the middle class and the upper middle class utilize to buy products instead of giving them the $5 trillion, which eventually would have made its way to the rich because they own and control everything anyway. But in the meantime, it would have stimulated the economy that much more. Now, this brings us to why such things happen as far as the wealthy being allowed to get away with not really helping the communities in which they live and causing harm by having so much excessive wealth. One of the problems that we have is that our leadership is basically corrupt. When you look at like what happened with Congress people and their ability to do insider trading, something that is illegal to the rest of us, there was never any accountability put forth as far as those people basically doing something that is illegal for the rest of us. As a matter of fact, when Nancy Pelosi was asked about Congress basically doing insider trading, she said that that was capitalism and that was the market, and they should be allowed to do it. So she didn't deny it; she actually approved of it and said that they were entitled to be able to do these things. So now you've got a bunch of people in Congress that are making money, and Nancy Pelosi herself is worth over $100 million, probably a lot more than that. But there's no way that as a congressperson she could have ever made that much money, even though she's been in Congress since '85, which is to me kind of an indicator of how poor of a leader she is, because in my view, America has not necessarily gotten better for the majority of Americans, especially not in the past 10 years. So, let's stop looking at these leaders as if they deserve to be in the positions that they're in. Let's elect new people that are basically willing to do the will of the people as opposed to doing the will of the rich. And speaking about corruption, let's look at Joe Biden's corruption. Now, when he was president, his son and his brother, they basically benefited from his presidency. They got jobs that they weren't qualified for. They got paid millions because of their access to Joe Biden, who was president at the time. And what I said at that time was, if your system is corrupt at the top, it's going to be corrupt all along, or there's a higher probability of it being corrupt all along. And Joe Biden was president, which arguably is the highest office in the land. So corrupt at the top, corrupt at the bottom. And now Joe Biden has led to Donald Trump. And all these people are hating Donald Trump, which rightfully they should hate Donald Trump for what he's done and is doing, continuing to do to the country, which is basically bring America to its knees. But look at the things that Donald Trump is doing. If that's not corruption, then what is? I mean, you can't really deny that he is basically doing everything he can to basically take as much money from the American public. He's suing his own government for $10 billion here, $10 billion there, basically suing the government, which he's in control of, and settling for $1 or $2 billion. Now, I don't know who in their right mind thinks that this is okay. And I really don't understand how our government doesn't seem to be able to stop him. The only answers that I can think of, they don't bode well for the American public as far as why Donald Trump is continuing to be allowed to do the things that he's doing to America. The war in Iran, it's basically once again showing that America's military is not as strong as people thought. And if you think about America's military, look at our past. Since World War II, America hasn't really won any military conflict that we've been involved in. I mean, other than Venezuela, where the Venezuelans basically just formed two lines and let Donald Trump bebop his way through the Soul Train corridor and just take their president, kidnap their president. But that's another matter. It just doesn't make any sense to me that we have, as a society and as a nation, have allowed this man to basically cause so much harm and to impoverish so many people, not only here in America, but around the world. And the thing about it, Trump has been going after everybody, allies and enemies alike. And now the whole world is turning against America. Well, that's why I want to present tomorrow my economic system and possibly provide other means that America can move towards as far as means of settlement. We just cannot continue to allow capitalism to go on the way that it's going. It's dog eat dog. And like they say, if you're not growing, you're dying. Which means that if you're not eating your competition and killing off your competition, then your competition is eating and killing you off.
As with the book entitled Solutions, enough complaining, let's fix America. Questions will be asked here to help the masses separate facts from the lies and misinformation our leaders tell us every day. For more tools to help you help your friends and family, get the book mentioned above at Amazon.com today.